to introduce, we have two speakers today who are going to be talking about the FAN, which stands for Facilitating Attuned Interactions, and they're going to be talking about how this is a tool for strengthening early childhood systems of care. So before I introduce Dorinda and Kate, I just want to put a little bug in your ear as you are listening to them speak about this really interesting tool. I imagine for some of you this might be the first time you're hearing of it, or it might be a newer concept. So just be thinking about how this might be applicable to your work, regardless of whether you'll be able to implement, to just be thinking about how this can be something and be thinking about how it might fit in, and then we can have some time to discuss at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to first introduce Dorinda Williams. She is an assistant professor at Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development, and she currently serves as the faculty FAN lead for the integration of FAN into DC's McV home visitation program. So McV, that's the federally funded home visitation program. And prior to her work at GUCCHD, Dr. Williams served as the director of military family projects at 0 to 3. And during her tenure at 0 to 3, Dr. Williams developed print materials, produced audio conferences, authored children's books, co-developed a parent app, contributed to curricula, provided training and consultation, and spearheaded new initiatives. Dr. Williams is a licensed clinical social worker with a comprehensive background in infant and early childhood mental health, parent-child attachment, reflective practice, home visitation, family stress and trauma, and military social work. So she's going to start, and then she's going to pass the baton to Kate Wasserman. So I'm going to introduce Kate now. Kate Wasserman is the co-director of the Parent, Infant, and Early Childhood Program with the Institute for Innovation and Implementation at University of Maryland School of Social Work, and there she oversees program and policy work for the Early Childhood Projects. She is a licensed mental health clinician with a dedicated focus in infant and early childhood mental health and maternal mental health with expertise in public health policy, program development, and direct service. She is a current 0 to 3 fellow. Actually, I think you just graduated, right, Kate? As well as a national trainer of the Fussy Baby Network, and previously served as a lead trainer for Maryland's Race to the Top and Project Launch Workforce Development Grants, where she was training primary care providers, mental health consultants, and home visitors on trauma-informed, family-focused infant mental health competencies throughout the state. And Kate holds an MSW from the University of Maryland School of Social Work, where she focused on maternal and child mental health, and has a bachelor's in political science from George Washington University. So as you can hear from these interviews, from these bios, you are about to hear from two experts in the field on the FAN and on all sorts of early childhood initiatives. So with that, I am going to first give a quick overview that this webinar is hosted, as I said, by the Early Childhood System of Care Learning Community. It's hosted by the National TA Network, and there's if you care to read, the disclosures there. And we do have the PDF of these slides in the file below, right below the public chat. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dorinda. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I'm really, really happy to spend time with you today to talk about the FAN. It really is, as you'll hear, a wonderfully reflective and strengths-based and flexible model that can be applied to just multiple settings and multiple disciplines. So Kate and I are really excited to be able to introduce this model to some of you, perhaps revisit it with others who are already immersed in FAN, or at least have been thinking about the FAN, and for us to really think with you about how the FAN might be useful within your system of care. So let's start talking about the FAN. And when we do look at the FAN, which Lauren had already shared, stands for Facilitating Attuned Interactions. It's really important to understand its origin, how it's actually embedded within the Fussy Baby network. Anyone who's ever taken care of an infant probably knows that those early weeks and months can be very tender and lovely and beautiful, and it can be very tough at the same time, right? It can be a very rough time as well, as caregivers and babies are really working to get to know one another and just to get into step with one another. And so the Fussy Baby program was developed specifically to support parents and caregivers in managing the strong feelings that can be associated with their infant's earliest days, weeks, and months in terms of the crying and the sleeping and the feeding, all of that, which can just be so laden, I think, with emotion. So the FAN is basically the reflective approach that has undergirded the Fussy Baby network. But the FAN has since been pulled out as a reflective and responsive way of just being with a parent or caregiver in general. So what's really cool is that the FAN, again, being very flexible, can be infused into a wide range of programs, curricula, and systems of care. So now it sits not only within the Fussy Baby network, but as you will see, has really been integrated across the state in almost every way imaginable. So just to give you a little bit of background about the model developer, it stems from the Erickson Institute, developed by experts there and under the leadership of Dr. Linda Gilterson. And the Erickson Institute is a graduate school in child development, and it integrates both research and service, and of course practice. So, as you would probably infer from the name of facilitating attuned interactions for the FAN, it's really got attunement as kind of the core, at its core. And I'm sure that many of you know about attunement, maybe to varying degrees, but just for kind of a shared definition, attunement is really that ability to read the cues of another and to respond contingently. And that's a big and, because oftentimes we might have a sense of what might be going on for another, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the way that we respond is really what that person needs. So that's, that idea of contingency is a critical piece of the equation. So it's not only being able to peer into the world of another, but to actually match with their internal state to another's internal state, to kind of join with them in that state and meet them where they are. And for babies and their parents and caregivers, these responsive interactions kind of serve as critical building blocks. Blocks for fostering strong and obviously very foundational relationships. And so when we think of a young child, how might it feel for them to have that important person or people in your life to really tune into what you're feeling and what you're experiencing? So from a developing baby's perspective, right, if I'm a developing baby, that can really help to shape my sense of self, my evolving, growing sense of self, and the people and the relationships that surround me. And what it does is it helps give me a sense of connectedness to others. I feel heard, I feel seen, and I feel understood, that self-experience that we sometimes speak to. And then hopefully with that, over time, I begin to internalize the understanding and belief that, you know what, I'm actually worthy of being heard and seen and understood. So that's quite a gift. That's a real gift for my developing sense of self and for how I view relationships and really how I view the world. So that's a gift that keeps on giving and that we really want to be able to share with families and have it integrated generationally. So we've had some lessons learned from families of fussy babies during that work. And part of that makes perfect sense in that what we understand is that if we truly want parents to be able to recognize, hold, and be responsive to their baby's experience, we, as helping professionals and larger systems of care, need to recognize, hold, and be responsive to the parent's experience. Right? We know that parents and caregivers need that holding as well. And to do that as providers, we need to really see and hold their experience, to stay longer in the hard places, or as it's sometimes been called, leaning into the sharp points, exploring and staying with what's possibly most challenging for a parent and perhaps doesn't necessarily feel so good. But it's an area that they want to explore, and so we're with them. We stay present with them in that hard place. Another kind of core principle in terms of seeing and holding the parent's experience is we need to see the baby that they see, that parents see, to walk in their shoes and to recognize that parents need to feel heard and understood before they can explore other perspectives and ways of being with and responding to their little ones. We also know that parents will sometimes go from person to person until they find someone who can really, truly hear them and acknowledge their experience. I can say that from my perspective, when I was a new parent, and I think many of you out there might have had a similar experience of kind of having this experience with your little one and wanting others to just kind of see and hear what you're experiencing. And that kind of opens you up to feel safe and trusting of that person that you're talking to about that situation and experience. We also need to help parents find their own way, recognizing that ultimately, who are the experts on their children? Parents and caregivers are the experts on their children. So there's a real, I think, respect for that that's encoded into the FAN model. And of course, as helping professionals, striving to do all of this good stuff, to support caregivers in these many different ways, we need to have a model, a framework that holds us as well, right? Holds us as well as the parent, that keeps us grounded and us regulated as we're working, and sometimes the messiness of working in the lives of others. And that allows us to be fully present and to really adapt to caregivers' needs. And what we'll also be talking about a little bit is that, we also need to be fanned, right, as part of being held so that we can hold families. So the supervisor can play a really critical role in the work as well, to be able to provide that space for us so that we can, in turn, can provide it for families. So here's a glimpse of the fan. And Kate is really going to go into much greater detail and granularity, but this just kind of gives you a snapshot of the fan. In general, I think what's helpful to know is that the fan is not a curriculum or something else to do. Instead, it's almost like an umbrella, and it can be used over different home visiting models or different program models. So it kind of supports how you do the work, a way of being with families. Jeree Paul, I'm sure many have heard, says how you are is as important as what you do. And so the fan really embraces and supports that core philosophy. So let's talk again about attunement, that idea of feeling connected and understood. The dance of attunement, as we sometimes refer to it, as we've shared, starts in infancy. When there is attunement, sometimes you just know it, right? Many of us have been in grocery stores, in parks, with friends, and there's just this beautiful flow, this beautiful dance of interaction. And you just kind of know there's attunement there. It's about sharing the feeling state of another, so that I'm knowing that I'm feeling okay and that this person really gets me. And again, this is a gift that plays out across a lifetime of relationships. So when we look at these images, we see a mother looking at her daughter, and there's not necessarily eye contact here, but we can also see that mom is really present. There's physical contact, and there's this level of connection. And so it looks like maybe daughter's, not in the mood for that full-on eye contact, but she certainly wants to know that she's being heard and that mom is listening intently. While in the second picture with that little infant, the focus is truly on each other. So these are examples of caregivers recognizing where their children are and then matching that emotional state and responding contingently to give them what they need. For this little baby, we see that, she's not turning her head. She's not looking away like it's too much for her. She's being very present with mom. So mom knows that this is the time that her little one is hungry for that eye contact and gazing. So again, it's not only being aware, but it's being responsive so that it's another's agenda and not just your own. And there's actually a theory of change associated with this. When someone feels truly understood or known, the attunement that occurs creates a space where it's possible to try new ways of interacting. What does that quote mean for you? I'm wondering if I could hear from folks just to kind of give a sense of what that means for you and what do you think it speaks to. I'm going to give it a little bit more time. I think I see some typing. I think Beth is typing hard. So okay. Less worry of being accepted when the connection has already been established. Yeah, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, Beth, but it sounds like maybe you're speaking to that trust, right? Feeling connected and knowing that it's there. You kind of get this overarching sense that you are accepted, that you have, if there's some kind of disconnect, you can repair, which we'll be talking to that as well, when the connection's already been established. We talk a lot about, thanks, Beth. We talk about how attunement kind of opens the space to growing and changing, and trying new ways of relating. Because just what Beth was talking about in terms of not being so worried about those disconnects, that the larger connection will remain, attunement can really help people feel safer, more whole, more calm and present. And with that, it's a little bit easier for them to access their own capacities. So that's why attunement is so central to our work with infants and parents, and with our colleagues as well. This is where we, again, think a little bit about parallel processes as well. When we are in attunement with and by our colleagues, which of course can include our supervisors, it helps give us the support, the safety, the feeling whole and calm and present, and the space to attune to and partner with parents, who then, of course, feel safer, more whole, more calm and present, and feel supported to increase their capacity to attune to their little ones. So here's a question, and I really want people to respond to this one. I'm wondering what you think in terms of what percentage of time that parents and infants, and we're talking about the most in-sync parents and infants, what do you think is the time that they are in perfect attunement? Give it to me in percentages. Do you think that happens 100% of the time, 15% of the time, 60%? Just give some numbers to me. So Elizabeth is thinking 60%. So Elizabeth is thinking if, if a parent and child are generally, like their overarching relationship is in sync, that probably you'd be in perfect attunement about 60%. Okay, I'm also getting 45%. 30%. Miranda, did you really know that was that really just a guess? Or did you already know what I was going to say? Miranda has actually hit it. It was just a guess, I promise. Thanks, Miranda. Well, you were on the money. It's actually 30%. So I don't know about you, but as a parent, when I heard that percentage, that even the most attuned dyads are only in perfect attunement 30% of the time, I sighed. That was a huge sigh of relief. We don't have to be perfect in our interactions, right? That is quite a relief. And I think that D.W. Winnicott, which was a great child psychologist, kind of recognized years ago when he would talk about the, quote, good enough parent, right, versus the perfect parent. So we know that perfect attunement is not always possible. So let's think more about the matching and the mismatching in relationships. So again, this speaks to that 30%. And by the way, this research comes from Ed Tronick, who was doing his work at UMass Boston. He watched and coded interactions in different relationships and discovered this 30% in sync time. And what was really interesting and very important was that the more troubled relationships, the relationships that we kind of needed to worry about a little bit more, were the ones where there wasn't necessarily repair. So that idea of repair is absolutely critical. It's that repair that kind of serves as the buffers or the safeguards in relationships. As a matter of fact, those repairs can be where the growth and the opportunity live. So as Dr. Brazelton said, when you do something that doesn't work, you have an opportunity to learn something and grow closer. It's also, this idea of repair and kind of getting back on track. It's also how you know that a relationship is sturdy and safe, right? This idea that you can come back and repair and stay connected. This supports the idea of resilience, right? We talk a lot about how do we promote resilience. These repairs promote resilience because we come to understand that relationships, when well tended to, are solid. And it tells us, in fact, not only the relationships, but we learn over time that we are sturdy and solid as well. That, in fact, we have the coping skills to navigate what's really an imperfect world of daily mismatches and errors. And we have the capacity with others' support, in relationships to actually grow and thrive. So the FAN, in its approach, really helps us to see when we're matching with another and also when we're not. Kind of recognizing those areas where we're not matching can be really important data as well that we might be able to use to inform our practice and to support parents in recognizing where sometimes the misattunement might lie. And then it helps us to make those repairs so that we are matching. So by repairing, we're helping to make our partnerships with parents even stronger. And again, so that in turn they can match, repair, and make their relationships with their little ones even stronger. So this hopefully gives you kind of a backdrop to kind of the theoretical orientation of the FAN and its kind of core philosophies. And Kate is going to give you more information, not only about more detailed information about the processes, but also many different ways that it's been integrated. So Kate?
Yes. Thank you, Brenda, for that beautiful introduction to the theory and sort of the work of the model. And as Brenda said, I'm going to spend some time over the next 20 or so minutes, really delving into what each of these wedges or core processes are for the model, and really shift from sort of what the theory of it is to sort of how you see it as a member of the workforce. So as we talk through this section of it, please think about your teams and kind of how this can support them in the work. And I've had a lot of conversations with Linda Gilkerson and her team at the Erickson Institute about this really being a shift to, in comparison to other evidence-based sort of intervention models, this is really a shift in how providers are with families. So it's not just about the curriculum that's developed, and in fact it overlays many different curricula, as Jerinda was saying, but it helps the provider, whoever is the FAN intervener, to really think about their use of self and how they are with parents or caregivers or whoever they're supporting. And it's really a holder for the parallel process, which we often talk about in a range of models. For those of you that are familiar with models like motivational interviewing or other concepts like this, some of this language will feel familiar, but it's really sort of packaged in a way that is much more authentic to infant mental health and the reflective processes. Starting first with this calming wedge. So you'll see, you're going to see this image, the sort of fan, some people call this the fan, right? Sort of half circle here. You're going to see this image over the screen several other times, and I'm focusing on the section right now that is yellow, and we're going to go through each of the core processes. But this first, really before any interventions are done, is really for the clinician or provider that's using the model to check in on themselves. And in some ways this looks linear, right, that you would kind of go from left to right the same way that we read or drive. But that this is really a space that is intentionally there in the beginning, but that someone using the fan could return to as they need whenever they feel sort of themselves getting a little agitated or concerned about the concepts that are being discussed or the severity of a given case. So this is one of the ways that the fan model itself is really supportive of efforts to be, family-focused and trauma-informed. As we work in a range of systems and settings that are really, helping our most at-risk children and families. A lot of times the workforce is in the homes where a lot of, concerning things are happening or addressing, reports from caregivers about their histories or current worries with respect to domestic violence or substance use or just, depression, anxiety, lack of attachment with their children, some really heavy things. And so this really honors the idea of the providers using mindful self-regulation strategies. And through the FAN training, a number of them are practiced, but it's really about finding the one that's going to be the best fit for the providers, and having that as a space to start so that you're settled and attended and able to attend to the dyad in the room or whoever you're working to support, and that you've also built up that muscle so that you know when you need to perhaps return to that in the moment. And Linda, Dr. Gilkerson at Erickson has talked about using this with residents, pediatric training residents that are working in urban settings before their 15-minute well child visit. So as they're learning to work with folks, and it was really impressive to sort of see how they picked up on this concept because. I think we're all scrunched for time in our daily activities, but you hear medical providers say that over and over again, and the fact that they felt like, using the strategy of checking in with themselves before opening the door to go to the next, quick and rushed and sort of often overpacked well child visit, it really helped them calm and settle and then be able to attune to the concerns in the room. So you'll see this sort of strategy or core process of mindful self-regulation very tied to the one that's next to it, which is the empathic inquiry core process. And, this is really part of the holding stance that is a priority for the FAN. This idea of being able to be calm and centered takes a lot of sort of skill and practice. So this quote here, change comes through repeated attuned interactions with a compassionate and regulated other. So much of a provider's ability to be supported and help with growth or goal achievement in any given intervention, be it in primary care, in home visiting, in clinical work, what have you, is really about their ability to model that regulated state. So having this core process be an essential part of that. And the parallel process of the goal, if you're using this in home visiting or in clinical work, you as the provider being a regulated, calm space for the caregiver so that they can have that experience with you and then do the same for their child. So we're really thinking about, the parallel processes here. The next section is empathic inquiry, and this is the beginning of the arc, which we'll go over in a minute as well. And this is really about sort of intentionally checking in with the caregivers about their feelings about the concerns. So you can see, the center of the FAN is really focused on what is the parent's concern, and Dorinda used the language earlier, which is really sort of essential and integrated to the FAN. This idea of seeing the baby that the parent sees, or as another way of saying, sort of really trying to understand their concern. And so much of that is through this exploration in empathic inquiry. We work with teams that, did not opt into the mental health side of work with families, that, went to school to be speech and language pathologists or special educators, PT and OT folks. And, this is, I think, initially an area that can be new or scary to them because they feel like that they might bring up things that they don't know how to support. But this idea of really using questions and language to understand what a parent's urgent concerns are and what their theory of the problem is, what are their emotions behind the referral, so to speak, really gives the providers a connection to the caregiver. So much of what Dorinda was talking about that feeling of when you have an authentically attuned relationship, it gives you sort of the strength and the bravery to try new things, right? But then also, there's this idea of it gives you as a provider much more information about what are the emotions and the sort of hidden concerns for the parents behind their expression of concern or the baby that they see, and how does it help inform how you think with them and then give them advice or guidance or strategies, and that often, spending some time in this empathic inquiry phase, and we'll go through some of the language around this in a minute, but that really helps providers understand more about the parent's concerns. And often, a couple of home visitors that the Erickson Institute team has worked with for years have talked about sort of this is the time where you sit on your hands and don't do anything. And this is a shift, right? Because a lot of people say that they get into this field because they like to be doers or like to come up with plans. And the theory here is that, we want to take away some of that authoritative or expert lens approach to working with families and really spend some time understanding what their experience is like and what some of the hurdles are. Because, if it was as simple as A plus B equals C, then it would be pretty easy to disseminate that broadly. But that we know that a lot of our targeted programs and services are really, dealing with families that have a lot of different barriers to services, or a lot of perhaps false starts or failures to comply with referrals or guidance or plans. And so spending some time in empathic inquiry really helps support exploration of that, and to further understand what those barriers are and how we then as service providers can link to appropriate places and spaces to address those needs. And then we get to thinking, and this again is a shift from sort of some other traditional models. We're not yet at the component of the intervention where you would go to capacity building or teaching or modeling, right? This is really once the FAN provider feels like the parent is settled, that they're no longer sort of in an expressive state about their emotions, that they both feel calm, and that from being in empathic inquiry with the caregiver, you have an understanding of what their worries are, or the extent of their concern, the extent of the baby that they see. You want to think through together with them, and again, really, really modeling this idea of partnering with the caregivers about this problem, and being careful to sort of come off of our pedestals and sort of sit on the floor with them, so to speak. And some of this is anchored in this. You see the bullet point that says arc middle. So this midpoint check-in of sort of asking them, we spent some time today focusing on this topic. Is this what you want to stay focused on, or do you have other things you want us to spend our time together here? That type of language is really reinforcing to the caregiver that this work is going to happen through them and not next to them or side of them, right? And that you begin to explore with them, what some possible solutions or theories or interventions could be, but it's very different than the sort of teaching which we'll get to in just a minute. So you'll see here capacity building or doing is the next core process. And this is where, once we have sort of a solid understanding of the parent's concern and what their emotions are around it, and we've thought through and kind of honored from them, things that they've already tried or things that they've discussed with other people, this is where you can, give some developmental guidance or some strategies to help them in a moment. There's the note here about capacity building moments or angel moments. This idea of, if they're having a hard time soothing their baby or addressing, discipline with their child, and that happens when you're there and you can talk them through doing that's really, Linda calls it a capacity building moment. It used to be called a fussy baby moment, but this is a little bit more of a strength building sort of language shift here. But this idea of, not just, theoretically away from the work, explaining to a parent what to do, but really being there in the moment and being their coach as they work to address whatever the given concern is. And sometimes those happen in the moment when you're there. That's ideal. Other times it's through their discussion with you, and you're able to kind of highlight small wins, or things that they might not see, but moving the needle in the right direction. The concept of angel moments are those moments where we're able to really highlight the connection and attunement that, again, so often we work with parents or providers that are focused on, addressing negative behaviors, and that, the sort of the utility in increasing parental confidence and the parent-infant relationship when you're able to highlight moments that we see of true connection. And sometimes those are big and small and missed by providers. And then, one of the other components in this doing that Linda always talks about is this idea of saying it in one drop, that, sometimes it feels like, all right, I've let the caregiver talk a little bit. I think I have a theory now. I can now get on my soapbox and do 20 minutes on whatever it might be, sleep regulation and the importance of bedtime routines, right? But that this is really, again, you want to kind of give like one breath or one drop of information and then go back to thinking together with the caregiver. So it's really about, sitting on the floor with them and partnering with them and removing the sort of authoritative or expert lens on the work. Because, again, a lot of the theory of change here is that, part of that is what, doesn't pay homage to the effort to increase parental confidence. And when we constantly, intentionally really reinforce the concept of them driving the work and how did that feel for them versus, I think that went really well. Those sort of simple language shifts can mean a great deal in highlighting the sort of core process, the boxes at the bottom here. I know how to use the pointer, right? Yes. So these boxes down here about increasing parental confidence and then strengthening the parent-infant relationship. And in doing those two things, promoting healthy development of parents and infants. This idea of, helping them grow beyond that specific moment. I'd like to get rid of this now. There we go. And so then the last core process is about integration, right? So the idea of, not just ending because the 45-minute hour is up, but how do we kind of echo again the intention of the caregiver driving the work in sort of ending the visit. And so, there's some ARC-specific language that we'll go over in a minute, but the intention here is really to pull the work together and to ask the caregiver about, what they want to remember or highlight from the session or the work that was done that day. What are their takeaways? And there's a couple of different ways to do that. And again, I think very similar to the work over on the left around mindful self-regulation, there are different strategies to accomplish both of these, and it's less about which one you choose and more about what's going to feel like a good fit for the provider that's using this intervention. But really, the intention of closing it out, but then not having the work of the visit end there, really helping the caregiver think about what they want to take away and how they might want to apply that if it's, until the next visit or until the next session. Pulling it all together, this is a picture of probably what nobody needs on their phone, on their cars anymore, because it's all on our phones, right? But one of those GPS guidance. And this came from a couple of the FAN trainers at the national level talking about the idea of the FAN, sort of that model, that sort of half circle with the wedges, really being a guide for providers, a GPS for providers to trust your gut as you're trying to be attuned to needs and to calibrate back and forth between the different core concepts or wedges, to help us in the parallel process to observe the parents' cues so that we can help them observe and cue into their child's cues. And that, so the same things are very true about relationships that Dorinda shared earlier with respect to attunement and the idea of honoring when it feels like we've gone too fast or ahead of where the parents might be, and that, really thinking about that as an opportunity for growth in the relationship between the provider and the caregiver as well, and that, using the FAN, the arc of the FAN questions, which I think is the next slide that we'll get to really intentionally check in with the caregiver so that, and there's, very specific language that's intentional there around, does it feel like it's working, and making sure that, both in sort of stance and language and timing of that we're sort of reinforcing that intentional check-in so that we're not getting, homage to the sort of authority of the relationship, and it's really more about, is this a fit for them? Is this meeting the urgent concern of the parent? And often, when we talk about applying this within a system of care or within a given setting, we have to sometimes, match a range of urgent concerns, especially when we're talking about families that might be involved in social services or DSS or sort of other interventions, depending on the level of crisis where they are. How do we really elevate the parent's concern while also working to meet, other concrete concerns or concerns for competing concerns for the child or the program. And then this idea of reattunement. So constantly, we check the plans for where GPS is going to tell us to go, but that's sometimes based on sort of traffic or things that unexpected things that come up ahead. We're rerouted, or we have to, kind of check in and see, how has it been a mile yet? Like, so this idea of sort of looking to intentionally to the FAN, to the GPS as guidance throughout the visit and not just before. So this here is the arc of engagement, and you can see it's a half circle, and it can overlay. It overlays the wedges. But if you guys wanted to sort of take one thing from this webinar and try to apply it to your practice, this is sort of the easiest and sort of most sort of easily taken away and applied independently concept of the FAN. And so it's this idea of right here. So this is this, I'm going to use this arrow thing again. So this, I thought I pulled it down. No? Yeah, okay. It's being funny, sorry. So right here, before the context, how I am, this is the mindful self-regulation check-in. So this would be, as you're, walking up the steps if it's home visit, or as you're going into the room if it's a clinic-based visit, just checking in with yourself. Like, what do I need to do to be fully present? Do I need to take 3 deep breaths? Do I need to review the case notes from last time to kind of remind myself of where we are? Like, what is my practice going to be that's going to regulate me cognitively and biobehaviorally, right? So, a lot of it is, around sort of the tying the physical to the cognitive, so that we can be present and attuned in the work. And then this next arc question is, the second question is, in the beginning of the visit, we intentionally ask, so if we're intervening directly with caregivers, we would ask the parent or caregiver here. And if this is a model that we're using in supervision, this is what the supervisor would ask of the clinician or the home visitor or the provider, right? So what has it been like for you to take care of Sam since I saw you last? Or what has it been like for you to sort of carry your caseload since we last checked in? So you really, it's intentionally different than how are you or how have you been, because those can kind of be seen as greetings in our culture, and that this is really about, wanting to know what it's been like for you to do this specific role in this given time period, right? So those sort of 3 anchors of that question are really intentionally checking in with that person. Near the middle, and it's intentionally over here to the side because it's hard to have this happen if you're paying attention to attunement and watching the dyad and sort of all of the different components and tasks of a given curriculum and activity. This never happens exactly at the middle of a visit, right? So there's some sort of intentional self-forgiveness here or compassion here. But at some point before the end, you want to have a midpoint check-in to just say, we've been spending a good amount of time focusing on whatever it is, blank during this visit or during this session. Are we getting to what you most wanted to talk about today? So it's offering, and again, this is used either in supervision of providers or with the parent directly or caregiver directly, you're just intentionally offering them the opportunity to raise any other questions that they have, or say, no, this is what I want to spend time on, and then that you're reinforced with that. When residents in the clinics talked about using this in their well-child visits with Linda and her team at the Erickson Institute, they talked about that having this question at the midpoint check-in reduced what they called, doorknob handle crises, when they're trying to leave the room and go to their next visit, and parents say, oh, it's my turn to talk now because they ended the visit and I have 6 questions, right? So this idea of, even though at the beginning you're reinforcing that you want to know how they're doing and what they want to focus on, that there's utility in reinforcing it before the end, right? And then the last part of the arc is this integration question. So at the end, you want to ask them, and you can ask it in either one of these ways. You can ask them for 3 words of how they would describe their child after the visit, or if they have 3 words about the visit, right, or about the session if it's for supervision. And then you can also ask it this way: I'm wondering if there was something you'd like to remember from our time together today. And again, it's the intentionality of that question, of sort of ending with, rather than assigning homework that fits sort of our priority, what do they want to, what was their biggest takeaways from this time? And, just anecdotally from my use of this model in a range of settings, sometimes you get really surprising responses that maybe, can inform what you would want to sort of prep and spend some time on next time, right? So it's not always what you would think necessarily. And sometimes it is, and that shows, again, sort of, the level of attunement for the work from that session. And, we touched on this a little bit sort of throughout the conversation of the core competencies or core components, but that the FAN overlays a number of different curriculum. It's been used in McPhee home visiting. It's been used in Head Start and early Head Start for providers. It's been used for mental health clinical providers, a range of settings and disciplines. But that overall, because it's really focused on identifying strengths and anchoring in regulation for both the provider and the caregiver, or the supervisory relationship, or the parent and provider relationship, that it really reinforces and complements a lot of efforts around trauma-informed practices. It's best when this is used in both the supervisory and a provider relationship, and you're able to kind of have some of this shared language around mindful self-regulation and attunement, cut both ways, so to speak. And that, the other way that it informs trauma-informed practice or supports that lens on the work is that, by going into the empathic inquiry and understanding parents' feelings about it, it removes implicit bias, and it helps support, reinforcement of relationships in that really difficult work. And so, we talked about SAN as sort of an overlay or sort of a model in general. But there's a couple of different ways that, as the work has grown nationally and actually even internationally now, that it's sort of taken hold in a couple of different ways depending on the programs that it fits inside. So we're going to spend some time talking about that now, and here's where we could take questions from you guys specific to your settings and what you're thinking about for your program. But in general, the FAN has been implemented as a framework in a range of systems of care for home visiting programs, for a range of providers to, within a given network, to have a shared language about families in the work. There are program sites, which is sort of the traditional way that it grew out of Chicago, where there's actually, a program that offers a warm line with that parents can call, and then home visitors that use this model as a brief intervention, and then would triage into higher level home visiting, or more long-term home visiting, or higher level clinical interventions, either targeted at the dyadic work or targeted at the caregiver's mental health or stress, depending on what's going on. And then infusion sites are sites that may have already had a clinical intervention model occurring, where all of the providers get trained in the FAN to use in conjunction with. And some examples of that would be, programs that use like Circle Security, that use the ABC home visiting model, or CPP. Those are all teams that Dr. Jokerson and at Erickson have met with their developers as well, and sort of developed crosswalks about how the models support each other. And again, it just is another sort of support to the clinicians in those settings to sort of think about this concept of attunement and interaction within those clinical interventions. The next couple of sites to show you kind of where things are happening. And so this is looking at the FAN sites that are focused on systems of care, and you will see some states that are repeated over here in systems of care, and then also the other models as well, because there's some ambitious folks that have been able to have different replications of the model happening. But as you can see, there's some McVie funding that was an initial driver of a lot of the work. So having this be spread across a range of home visiting providers and networks has been, one of the biggest spreads of it throughout, and has happened statewide in a number of places. And then, some specific programs. I won't read you guys the actual list, because you'll have these slides in PDF downloadable form, and this is also available on the Fussy Baby website through Erickson. But then, so there's a couple of other program sites. So these are the sites, these are the places that have the traditional warm line where anybody can call with a concern about their child being fussy or difficult to soothe. The home visitors go out and use the Fussy Baby model and then triage to greater services as needed. And then these are some of the infusion sites. And as you can see, some of them are very targeted. Some of them are all the way in Jerusalem. And there was an Australian site as well, I believe, in New Zealand, sorry. Not Australia, New Zealand, in the system of care work. So this is, very consistent with a lot of the growth of reflective practice in these settings. This is just another way to illustrate where some of the work is happening. You can see some natural clusters based on proximity to the Chicago and the Erickson Institute, and then there's a couple of places in Boston that are applying the model, and throughout. Tulane is here in Louisiana, but is really sort of doing this whole region, this whole Gulf Coast region. And Tori Graham is the person within the Erickson Institute in Chicago who is overseeing sort of at the national level the training and sort of growth of the network itself. So if you guys had questions about training or the ability to bring the model within your specific settings or sites, this is the person that you would want to contact. She has been at Erickson for about 1.5 years now, and in that time has done a lot to really bring the network together in terms of more communication about what's happening, as well as really further develop some training activities and slides that are specific to the sort of broad now range of settings and services and providers that the model is now embedded within. So she's done a ton of work in her time there. So we just wanted to sort of pull up the model again so you could see it, because some of the language might be specific or to it or new to you guys. But wanted to open it up for questions or comments now, either related to the ARC or the core components, or related to the model in general.
And here I think we can unmute the phone line so folks can feel free to use the chat, or I know some of you have called in just via the phone, so we're going to unmute the line. So if you have a question, just chat away. Okay, we are unmuted. So that also means if you're not speaking, feel free to please keep yourself on mute. Give folks a few minutes to think about some questions they might have for either Kate or for Dorinda. Looks like there might be a few people typing in. Kate and Dorinda, I'm going to read this question because we have a few folks that are on the phone. So Miranda asked, or let us know that she actually works for the Erickson Institute, but in rural southern Illinois in a different program. So she's been trying to connect a local system with FAN training. However, there have been concerns raised that it's not an evidence-based practice. So any thoughts on how to address that? That's a great question, Miranda.
So this is Dorinda, and I can kind of share the bits and pieces that I know, and I'm sure that Kate can follow up and share more. I think what's important is that it's evidence-informed, and it's grounded in some really solid theory. And there have been, we're actually in the midst of an evaluation, so hopefully we'll have the findings in the coming year or so. I think that there are some studies out there, and I would actually, I would perhaps connect you to Tori to try to, maybe gain access to some of those. There's definitely a lot of intentional work going on right now across sites to be focused on evaluation. And so I think that we will get there in terms of meeting, there's a lot of criteria that needs to be met in order to call something evidence-based. But I think that's definitely a direction that we're moving into, and I think that there might be some studies that could be helpful to just, be able to share some of the research and findings that we do have.
Yeah, this is Kate. I would just echo what Adrian is saying. I mean, I think it's certainly evidence-informed, and there are a number of publications that support the work. So if you look up Linda Gilbertson and Mary Claire Heffron, they're sort of the two sort of main authors behind a lot of the journal articles that talk about SAN implementation and some of the sort of smaller case findings. And the other, I think, it's worth making the argument, and I guess it depends who you're making the argument to, right? But about the idea of, really the difficulty of having evidence in a program that is sort of rooted in sort of these concepts around, self-reflection and attunement and like these really difficult things to measure, but the things that are core to the work. And so how do we rely less on, maybe some of the more traditional evidence models for that and a little bit more on, some other avenues for legitimacy in the model, given that focus. That, there's some, we were talking about this actually at the beginning before the call started, that there are some measures out there to look at, quality of reflective supervision and quality of reflective stance in the work, but that they're inherently sort of applied, and so how do we really know what's an authentic measurement of success? There's some programs that are showing, like programs that are in the infusion site, so that have, are doing their own clinical model, but have added the SAN training to have some findings of increased retention in program services. So you can make sort of the argument there that like having this shift in the approach, even though you're still delivering the same baseline curriculum or clinical intervention, that it offers sort of a higher level of activity of providers to target parents or target caregivers. But it's also something that's really hard to feel comfortable putting numbers around.
Thank you so much. Looks like Miranda might have a question in response, but couldn't agree more with both of what you said. We are often caught in such a space where we have these innovative practices that are emerging, but there's also that lag, right? Like we know how long it takes for something to become evidence-based, so then we get caught in that lag time.
Mm-hmm.
So while we see if Miranda has a follow-up, are there other questions, comments? Anyone just saying, wow, this is really cool, but I'm not quite sure how it would fit? Sometimes I think that's probably one of the hardest parts, is thinking about what your system of care might look like and just trying to see, wow, where does this have a place? I think the way so beautifully explain the model that it actually it can be such a seamless way to enhance how your caregivers and all your service professionals are working together and working with families, but kind of making that leap sometimes can seem a little tricky.
And this is Kate. I would just add, because I realize that we kind of neglected to explain the different levels of the model and how training would or could happen. But essentially, there's sort of two different levels of the training. So level one, and there's no requirements around sort of degrees or certifications that can be applied for any sort of community-based health workers, home visitors, clinicians, et cetera. But the initial sort of SAN level one is 2 days of orientation, and then for folks that are doing level two, sort of to get support around applying it in their practice, It's generally, and it's structured a little bit differently. There's flexibility based on the programs and funding and so all that stuff, but there's been about 10 months of facilitated practice where you would use it in sessions with families or in supervision sessions and complete reflection tools on them and then have that happen, have that be facilitated in supervision. And then there would be a third day of integration at the end of that. So essentially, it's about a year of, training at varying activity rates throughout that time for both SAN level 1 and level 2. And then Linda has developed, and again, this would be really all questions that would go first to Tori, but Linda has developed, a range of models for sustainability within programs. So there's the opportunity for leads to become program trainers that they can then sort of train new staff, because that's always a question too, right, is investment in evidence-based practice or an evidence-informed practice that requires training and exposure, and then, staff move on or whatever, so.
Yeah, and I think that piece is so important in terms of really engaging the community, to continue the work and promote sustainability in that respect, so that, a program is not continuing to rely maybe on a outside mentor or trainer, that sometimes the community can, take on that role as well over time. That is great. Thank you so much for adding that information about training. So it's a long process to fully get there, but I bet even just going through that process of getting the training, I'm sure practice is being changed during that training period. Other questions, thoughts, comments for Dorinda and for Kate? As we said earlier, there is a PDF version of the slides that's in the file pod. So in there we have that contact information for Tori with Erickson. So certainly we are happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Kate and Dorinda would be happy to answer questions. And then if you have more specific ones about FAN training along those lines, Tori would be a good first person to check in with. And, one other piece that I just wanted to add, Lauren, is, just an example of the level of flexibility of the model and kind of the, having the courage to think outside of the box. This has, for example, been used, within the legal systems as well. And I have been providing mentorship for the level 2 phase for law school fellows who in turn are supporting their law students. So again, it can really apply across settings and across disciplines. And I know that some of that work is, similar work is being done in Nebraska as well in terms of fanning judicial representatives so that there's more of a shared language and collaboration within those members of those court systems.
Well, again, really another illustration of the trauma-informed practice, right? That those are providers or experts that are working in a field that are dealing with families in crisis or in trouble. Right. Somebody's in front of the judge because something's not going well, right? So this idea of really honoring sort of that reflective relationship and what the work means to them to keep them in the work.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could do a whole nother series of these calls just on staff retention and what it means to really provide an environment where staff are feeling connected to the work and to themselves. That seems like another place for that to be a tool.
Yeah, attuned to.
Exactly. Other questions or thoughts? If not, we will be happy to give everyone 10 minutes back in their day. I want to thank Dorinda and Kate again so much for sharing your expertise and your really insightful thinking on how the fan can be used in so many different and really important ways. I know that Tiara is going to put the poll, or I think it's a link to do the evaluation. So please do click on that, and if you have any feedback, let us know. This is actually the last scheduled early childhood system of care learning community for now, because in 2 months the TA Network will be hosting the training institutes. So I certainly hope to see many of you there and meet you in person. So there is the link up there. And yeah, so thank you all so much for giving some of your afternoon to us. And thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.